When the German archives began to be reviewed after the surrender, among so many papers appeared reports signed by Nazi officers who had led extermination operations in the East. They were not battle plans or military strategies. They were cold records with marked towns, exact quantities of victims and dates noted in detail. The responsible parties were the commanders of the Einsatzgruppen, mobile groups created by the Nazi High Command to follow the German army and systematically eliminate civilians. They were officials with administrative positions, academic degrees, and signed everything they did. When the trials began, all were identified. There were documents, figures, and sealed orders. Solid evidence was presented, convictions were handed down, and several received final sentences. But between political decisions, sentence reductions, and diplomatic maneuvers, many stories took another turn. What exactly was done to the commanders of the Einsatzgruppe, or how did they really end up? In mid-June of 1941, just as they were about to cross the Soviet border, Reinhard Heydrich summoned the heads of the special units that were going to follow the German army. And right there, without hesitation, he told them what they had to do: eliminate anyone who represented a problem for the Reich's plans. On that list was everyone the regime had marked beforehand, starting with the Jews, men, women and children, followed by Soviet political commissars, Roma, and anyone else who got in the way and did not fit the idea of ethnic cleansing they managed from Berlin. Each group received a specific area. Group A was to operate in the Baltic countries, B was sent to Belarus, C was deployed across central and northern Ukraine, and D covered the south, including Crimea and even regions of the Caucasus. They had everything clear from the beginning. They were not going to capture or interrogate anyone. The task was simple: arrive behind the troops, identify the victims and kill them, without making noise and without stopping. The responsible parties did not come from the traditional army. They had academic training, university studies, degrees in law, economics or public administration. Some had directed police departments. They were accustomed to organizing, calculating and executing tasks methodically. Instead of concentration camps, they operated on the ground. They closely followed the German troops, arrived at recently captured localities, gathered the marked people, and took them out of the town to previously chosen sites. In forests, open fields, or road margins, they made them walk to the edge of a previously dug trench. Each unit had its own personnel. Some drove the trucks, others dug the graves, others were in charge of making the records. The armed men executed the victims in shifts, one line behind another. They had to be efficient. Internal reports detailed how much ammunition was spent per person. The initial calculations indicated around 12 shots per execution, but then they adjusted the procedure to reduce consumption to less than 6 projectiles per victim. The leaders demanded precision, speed, and measurable results. The most common method consisted of forcing the victims to remove their clothes, walk to the edge of the ditch, and be shot in the back of the neck. The bodies fell in layers. After each batch, the next group was brought forward. This form of execution was systematized and applied for months. In some places, children were thrown directly among the bodies before the pit was closed. In others, they were shot separately. The scene was repeated every day in different parts of Eastern Europe. During the first 6 months after the start of Operation Barbarossa, there was one unit that recorded more than 200,000 people murdered, and another that reported more than 90,000. Everything was precisely recorded. Each operation had its number, its location, the precise date, and the type of people eliminated. Each person responsible signed the documents that were then sent to Berlin, where they were added to the central security system. This type of paperwork circulated as a normal part of the work of these units, without any secrecy or urgency, as if it were any routine report. The logistics were organized in detail. Trucks transported the shooters, motorcycles carried the messengers, and vehicles equipped with radios served to coordinate actions. Each group had tools, ammunition, fuel, and alcohol. They also had maps, lists of names, and local collaborating personnel. Auxiliary Ukrainian, Lithuanian, and Latvian police actively participated. They pointed out residents, provided information, and sometimes also shot. They contributed local knowledge and facilitated the identification of targets. To maintain the morale of the executioners, the commanders organized meetings before each operation. There, the idea that these were necessary measures for the protection of the Reich was reinforced. They spoke in technical terms, as if it were just another task within a larger plan. After certain massacres, they organized celebrations with drinks and breaks. Some groups brought photographers, and the images were kept as part of the internal documentation. One of the most documented massacres was that of Babi Yar, on the outskirts of Kyiv. In just 2 days, more than 30,000 Jews were murdered. The procedure was identical: concentration, transfer, stripping of belongings, execution, and burial. The same commander who led that operation was later tasked with eliminating the evidence. He was entrusted with assembling teams to exhume the bodies and burn them, erasing the traces of what had happened. This task received its own name within the extermination apparatus. For a time, the High Command was satisfied with the results. But after a visit to Minsk, Heinrich Himmler was disturbed after witnessing an execution. From that moment on, the search for methods that would cause less impact on the shooters was promoted. Thus, the first gas vans were born. Victims were locked inside the vehicle, and the engine channeled carbon monoxide into the compartment. They died of asphyxiation during the journey. When they arrived at the final site, the bodies were unloaded directly into the trenches. Despite this innovation, shootings remained the main method throughout 1941 and a good part of 1942. The units continued to move, adjusting their operation, refining their reports. Execution had become a technical routine. The documents spoke of successful operations, operational efficiency, and resource optimization. There were no emotional mentions, only figures and results. Coordination with the German army was constant. Regular troops protected the perimeters, facilitated access to localities, and allowed the mobile groups to act without interference. In some cases, the same military divisions provided personnel. Administratively, civilian authorities were responsible for registering confiscated goods. Clothing, watches, and valuables were sent to classification and distribution centers. Each group developed its own internal system. Some kept photographic diaries, others maintained balance sheets with the number of daily executions. Reports were sent weekly to central offices. The precision with which everything was recorded later showed the full scope of the operation. Open-field executions left hundreds of burial sites in Eastern Europe. Many of these graves remained unidentified for years. When Soviet troops began to reclaim territory, they found physical evidence: bullets, human remains, clothing, personal identifications. Every find was a confirmation of what was already in writing. By the end of 1942, the extermination system in camps was operating on a large scale. Gas chambers began to replace mass shootings. The mobile units were withdrawn or assigned to partisan persecution tasks. Their primary function had been fulfilled. The structure had done its part. Now remained the legacy of their passage: empty villages, meticulous records, and a final number of victims exceeding 1 million. When the war ended, the documents found in the Reich security archives confirmed every figure, every operation, every order. The reports sent from the mobile units to Berlin were intact. Tens of thousands of pages with names, places, dates, and quantities. The precision with which everything had been carried out facilitated the accusation. In mid-1947, the Allied tribunals were ready. 24 high-ranking officers from the units responsible for the extermination faced an independent trial in Nuremberg. The process began on September 15th and was entirely organized by the American authorities. Unlike the main trial, this one focused on the officers who planned and directed mass executions in the field. Each accused had been in command of a group with an assigned zone, men under their control, access to resources, and autonomy to execute orders. None had been a mere cog. Each one signed reports, decided on strategies, and supervised systematic murders in occupied towns. The chief prosecutor, Telford Taylor, gathered evidence with a clear focus to show that there was a structured plan, supported by records, and that the accused had executed it with full knowledge. The evidence was overwhelming. More than 200 original documents, all with authentic signatures, included daily execution records, requests for ammunition, reports on bullet consumption, and lists classified by age, sex, and nationality of the victims. The trial was brief and direct. In just 2 days of opening, the prosecution presented its case. The documents spoke for themselves. Each sheet had specific data: operation location, number of people eliminated, method used, and the name of the officer who reported it. Some of these reports even included comments of approval regarding the efficiency achieved. Execution was treated as a logistical task. During the hearings, the accused listened to the charges without interruption. When asked to speak, they offered technical explanations. Some detailed how operations were organized, others described the resource distribution system or the procedures for digging trenches and selecting targets. They spoke with detachment, as if they were office reports. There were no discussions about morality, ethics, or repentance. Each statement reinforced the idea that the extermination had been an operation designed to the millimeter. Otto Ohlendorf, one of the main accused, confirmed that his unit had executed close to 90,000 people. He explained the group's operation, the orders received, and the internal justifications for including all members of a community. He said that no exceptions were made because the idea was to prevent survivors from growing up with resentment. He spoke like someone repeating a learned instruction. Others gave similar presentations. Each one detailed their function without going into personal aspects. The court also analyzed physical evidence collected in the massacre areas. Experts from different countries had excavated graves, collected human remains, identified projectiles and documents, and everything matched the reports presented. The figures coincided with what appeared in the archives: the dates, the places, the types of weapons. Even the casings found corresponded to the standard issue weapons used by the squads. Some witnesses were called to provide additional details. There were survivors who had escaped the massacres. One of them precisely described the process of separating groups, the transfer to the trenches, the moment they were made to take off their clothes, and how each row was executed. He said that personal items were collected, classified, and then sent to other destinations. He recounted how they simulated transfers to deceive detainees until the last moment. Photographs taken by the accused officers themselves were also presented. Some showed the executions, others recorded the results. They were projected in the courtroom. The judges reviewed each image. The prosecution used this material as direct confirmation of the work carried out by these units. It was not interpretation or narrative, it was visual evidence produced by those responsible themselves. The judges analyzed the relationship of each accused with the events. They evaluated ranks, functions, decisions made, and level of involvement. During the trial, the differences among the accused became clear. Some had directed complete operations, others signed reports and organized resources. Some planned the routes, others designated personnel for each task. Each case was treated separately. The defenses tried to focus their arguments on technical aspects. They mentioned hierarchies, chains of command, internal regulations. They argued that the accused were part of a state structure with established procedures, but the judges focused on the documents and the individual authority exercised. It was established that each one made conscious decisions and organized killings with full knowledge of their impact. Throughout 136 sessions, the tribunal reviewed all the evidence. Deliberations lasted several weeks. On April 9, 1948, the results were announced. 14 were sentenced to hanging, 2 to life imprisonment, and 5 to sentences between 10 and 20 years. Only one accused was released due to lack of direct involvement and evidence showing attempts to avoid murders. Otto Ohlendorf was one of those sentenced to death. He had led the group responsible for more than 90,000 executions. During the process, he maintained a distant attitude without altering his discourse. Another condemned was Paul Blobel, in charge of the Babi Yar massacre. In addition to that operation, he also organized the burning of corpses in mass graves as part of a plan to eliminate traces. Ernst Bieberstein, a former Protestant pastor who had become a squad leader, was also sentenced. His change of role reflected how religious or civilian structures had been absorbed by the extermination apparatus. Werner Braun, a doctor of law who organized the murder of thousands of people in Crimea, received the death penalty. The court emphasized that his legal training gave him full capacity to understand the criminal nature of his acts. In other cases, such as that of Walter Heinsch, the evidence was less consistent, and his sentence was 15 years. The trial showed that each individual was evaluated separately. The judges avoided generalizations and handed down sentences based on direct evidence. The execution of the sentences was carried out by the American military authorities. The dates and procedures were determined according to precise protocols. The condemned were notified of their fate and preparations began for the place where the sentences would be carried out. The next phase was already scheduled. Justice, in formal terms, had delivered its part. The executions began in the early morning of June 7, 1951, inside Landsberg prison in Bavaria. The American Army adapted a gymnasium in the penitentiary complex to meet the technical requirements. 3 structures with trapdoors controlled by a mechanical system were built. The method used guaranteed a quick death by neck dislocation, following military execution manuals. Each of the condemned was notified in advance. Regulations stipulated that they were to be woken up 2 hours before their turn. They received clean clothes provided by the prison, could write a last letter, and were offered a final meal. Almost all asked for coffee and cigarettes. No one requested special dishes. They were also given the option to receive religious assistance. Some accepted, others did not. Otto Ohlendorf was one of the first to be transferred to the chamber. He walked with a firm step, answered with his full name when asked, and remained silent until the end. Medical personnel confirmed his death 4 minutes after the mechanism was activated. No signs of prolonged suffering were recorded. Paul Blobel showed a different attitude. Days earlier, he had asked for sedatives to sleep. He spoke several times with a Lutheran chaplain. During his transfer, he showed tremors and weakness in his legs. Security personnel had to hold him up so he could stand. He murmured phrases in German, although none were recorded as a formal statement. Werner Brauner tried to read a text written before being executed. The content was interrupted by the staff as it was deemed inappropriate. It was an ideological defense. The protocol did not allow such messages. The rope was placed, the trapdoor opened, and the doctor certified the death 5 minutes later. Ernst Beiberstein, the former pastor turned squad leader, spent his last hours with chaplains. He received communion and requested that religious literature be given to his family. Accompanied to the platform, he greeted the chaplain with a brief gesture before being covered with the hood. He died in 3 minutes, according to the medical report. After each execution, the body was removed and transferred to an adjoining room. There, a final review was carried out. Military authorities decided that none of the remains would be returned to their relatives. They were buried in unmarked graves within the prison grounds. The records with the exact location were archived as restricted documents. The measure sought to prevent these places from becoming gathering or exaltation points. It was a deliberate decision to close the chapter definitively. No headstone, no ceremony, only the fulfillment of the sentence and the corresponding documentation. Official witnesses were present during the executions. Legal representatives, American officials, and journalists from selected media observed the procedure. The legal standards established by military jurisdiction were respected. There were no interruptions. Each execution was carried out following the same steps, with the same duration, and under constant medical supervision. The American press published brief notes focused on the procedural part. The New York Times reported the facts with emphasis on the correctness of the procedure. The coverage was not extensive. Public attention had already shifted to Cold War issues. In West Germany, some media covered the events in more depth, though always from a legal perspective. Der Spiegel explained the legal framework and the impact within the denazification process. Soviet publications approached the topic from a different angle. They focused on the brutality of the crimes committed on Soviet territory and called the sentences lenient. Pravda criticized the delays, commutations, and the limited number of perpetrators executed. They highlighted that many material perpetrators remained free or without open judicial proceedings. The debate about justice intensified after the executions. Within the American military government itself, there were disagreements. Some sectors called for all death sentences to be executed without exception. Others considered it necessary to apply differentiated criteria according to the specific participation of each accused. This tension led to the formation of a review board in 1950. Headed by High Commissioner John McCloy, the commission reanalyzed dozens of sentences imposed in Nuremberg. In the case of those convicted of leading mobile extermination units, several sentences were reduced. Some executions were suspended, becoming life imprisonment. Others were shortened to determined prison terms. The total number of commuted sentences caused mixed reactions. In the United States, editorials reflected this division. Some valued the review as a sign of legal rigor. Others saw signs of weakness in the face of crimes that, due to their scale, required maximum penalties. In Germany, younger generations began to distance themselves from the dominant post-war narrative. Youth press and certain academic sectors began to investigate the actions of mobile units in greater depth. In Israel and among Jewish communities, the executions were considered insufficient. Many expressed frustration at seeing some perpetrators avoid capital punishment or be released after a few years. Survivor organizations and public figures insisted that the punishments applied did not correspond to the magnitude of the harm caused. The trial archives were fully preserved, more than 250,000 pages, including reports, photographs, interrogation records, and complete transcriptions. Researchers, historians, and jurists used them in the following decades to precisely understand how the open-field extermination structure functioned. The information gathered allowed for knowing not only the crimes, but also how they were planned, executed, and recorded. It also revealed the coordination mechanisms between police forces, military structures, and local authorities. Every aspect had been archived in detail. After the executions, investigations into the crimes committed by the units continued. In the 1960s and 1970s, new mass graves were located in different regions of Eastern Europe. In some cases, the records found in the trials helped identify places that had never been excavated. The follow-up work included locating collaborators, secondary supervisors, and logistical personnel. Although most of the main perpetrators had already been tried, judicial authorities in several countries continued to open cases for participation in mass murders during the Nazi advance through the East. Landsberg prison, years after the executions, was used for other purposes. No marker or sign recalled what had happened there. Public memory of that place was restricted to official documents and preserved testimonies. The executions of June 1951 closed a process that had begun years earlier, when the first documents were discovered in the Reich's security archives. This outcome was recorded step by step. Every transfer, every rope, every name, and every final statement were written in minutes and certified by legal witnesses. The operation concluded as planned, at the established location and under regulatory procedure. After the trial concluded and the executions were carried out, political considerations began to outweigh judicial decisions. Tensions between the Allied powers grew, and the Cold War demanded new calculations. The US administration needed to rebuild West Germany as an ally against Soviet expansion. This shift altered how pending sentences were handled. In 1950, John McCloy assumed the role of High Commissioner in Germany and convened a commission to review the cases of war criminals, including those convicted of leading the mobile extermination groups. The review yielded quick results. Some death sentences were commuted to life imprisonment. Others were reduced to determined prison terms. The arguments used to justify these reductions included factors such as time served, good behavior, and differences in the level of direct involvement. These decisions reopened the debate about the type of justice being applied. For many, the new approach prioritized geopolitical convenience over the proportionality of punishments. Reactions were immediate. In the United States, media published editorials with varying tones. Some defended the review as part of a broader policy of stabilization. Others pointed out that releasing those responsible for mass murders weakened the legal message of Nuremberg. In Germany, the impact differed by generation. Among younger people, the changes sparked a growing interest in reviewing the recent past. Some media published detailed reports on what happened in the trial of the Mobile Group commanders, using declassified documents and interviews with researchers. The judicial process left an immense collection of documents. All were preserved in official archives, more than 250,000 pages with minutes, reports, statements, correspondence, and graphic evidence. Researchers and academics accessed this material to reconstruct the operational structure of the extermination. Each unit, each route, each figure was precisely recorded. The content of these archives made it clear how the killings were organized, who was involved, and what methods were used. This body of documentation was key for new trials to be opened in different countries years later. The information was not limited to the court that issued the original sentences. It was used in subsequent processes and served as a basis for studies, reports, and exhibitions on the functioning of the extermination apparatus in Eastern Europe. The exact figures, names, locations, and orders made it possible to trace events that, without these documents, would have remained undocumented. In the following decades, the work of historians like Raoul Hilberg demonstrated that the machinery of the Holocaust did not operate as a chaos of improvised decisions, but as a structured system where every action was recorded, evaluated, and reported. The mobile units were a fundamental part of that initial phase of direct elimination. Before large-scale gas chambers existed, more than 1 million people had already been murdered by mass open-air shootings. Over time, new justice initiatives emerged. In the 1960s, the Auschwitz trials began in Frankfurt. German judicial authorities used the Nuremberg model as a reference. The principles that had been established in the case of the mobile groups served as a legal basis: individual responsibility, the impossibility of justifying mass crimes with hierarchies, and the obligation of each officer to evaluate the legality of received orders. In that context, the precedents of the trial against the commanders of the mobile units regained relevance. The recordings, interrogation records, photos, and original reports became secondary evidence in new judicial processes. They also began to be used in educational programs, in Holocaust exhibitions, and in the creation of memorials dedicated to the victims of open-field executions. Access to Soviet archives after the dissolution of the USSR allowed for complementing existing information. Historical commissions in Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltic states located new mass graves. Many coincided with the places mentioned in the mobile group documents. Personal objects were recovered, human remains were identified, and the actual scale of the killings could be confirmed. In several cases, the figures turned out to be higher than initially reported. In the 1990s, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia adopted principles directly extracted from the Nuremberg trials. One of the most important concepts was command responsibility. This idea, formulated during the process against the leaders of the mobile groups, established that a commander could be criminally responsible for crimes committed by subordinates if they had authorized, tolerated, or not prevented the actions. The Rome Statute, which gave rise to the International Criminal Court in 1998, also drew upon these precedents. Its articles incorporated provisions that limited the use of superior orders as a defense. The reasoning behind these rules was largely built on the legal analysis of the trial of the mobile squad commanders. Meanwhile, investigations continued. In 2011, a conviction was issued in Germany against a Ukrainian who had worked in the Sobibor extermination camp. The court considered that his mere presence at the site, performing logistical functions within a criminal structure, constituted active complicity. This legal interpretation was possible thanks to the criteria developed decades earlier in Nuremberg. At the same time, memorials began to multiply. In countries like Lithuania, Ukraine, and Poland, plaques and monuments were placed at the sites where the mobile units operated. Many of these places had remained unmarked for years. Over time, documentation centers and museums were built dedicated to explaining how systematic killings functioned outside the concentration camps. Information about these units was no longer limited to archives or academic circles. New generations accessed this knowledge through books, documentaries, research, and digital platforms. The routes, the names of the towns, the dates, and the figures began to circulate as part of the study of the Holocaust. In each site where a mass grave was found, the record was linked with the official documents to accurately reconstruct the operation that produced it. The trial of the mobile group commanders was neither the first nor the most publicized, but it established a series of legal foundations that transformed how the world understood criminal responsibility in mass crimes. It also left a detailed archive, useful for tracing individual responsibilities, identifying victims, and reconstructing the process of mass execution by region. In every testimony, every minute, every report signed by the accused, the necessary information was found to understand how that system worked. Every name registered, every figure reported, every place indicated served to reconstruct a part of the events. Over time, these documents helped to confirm what happened, to locate those responsible, and to maintain a concrete record of the actions carried out by the mobile extermination groups in Eastern Europe.